Every Indian school kid knows what happened on the outskirts of Srinagar in 1947. Thousands of Pakistani irregulars raised from tribal levies, backed by troops, stormed to the gates of Srinagar and were finally defeated only by a heroic Indian army operation that slowly recovered Jammu and Kashmir for India. It's less well known, though, that in the 1965 war, Pakistani irregulars had arrived as close to Biru on the edges of Srinagar and were poised to capture the city. The story of how that happened, Pakistan's Operation Gibraltar, I discussed in the last episode of this series on Pakistan's Defence Day, which commemorates what that country claims is its defence of Lahore against Indian attack. Today, though, I'm going to talk about the next step in that war, which again came before that famous attack on Lahore. This was called Operation Grand Slam. Having realized that their irregular campaign to seize Kashmir had failed, Pakistan decided to step up the pressure. India was confident Pakistan posed no conventional military threat. The maximum it would do was attack with more irregulars, maybe shell across what was then called the ceasefire line, now called the line of control, and maybe launch a few raids. At a meeting on the 31st of August 1965 at Srinagar, between the Chief of Army Staff, the General Officer commanding 15 Corps, and the Director of Military Operations, the Army Chief noted that Pakistan had decided not to officially align itself with the infiltrators. But if it decided to do so, he thought, India would be more than able to resist with the light forces it had in the Chhamb area. In fact, Pakistan's plans to launch Operation Grand Slam couldn't be concealed, and from India's official war history, it's clear that United Nations observers actually warned that troops were massing for an attack. But the warnings don't seem to have been taken seriously. The Indian armed strength in the sector remained at just about 1,000 men, mainly lightly armed police. There were some concrete bunkers, a few trenches, but nothing really capable of resisting a full-blown attack. Indian forward positions were soon overrun by Pakistani armour, which at one stage came within 450 meters of the brigade headquarters. In a remarkable performance, the 15 Kumaon Regiment destroyed the leading Pakistan tank, knocked out the barrel of the following tanks, and the Pakistan tanks, apprehending that the resistance was bigger than they expected, turned around and retreated. But most of the Indian posts were overrun and the troops either killed or taken prisoner. In this grim situation, the brigade commander made a request for immediate help from the Air Force. But IAF sorties began only at 5 o'clock in the evening, by when the situation had got even worse. By 6 o'clock, the Pakistan army had driven a wedge between Mandiala and Chhamb, and by 10 o'clock, Pakistani tanks were crossing over the eastern bank of the Tavi River. Simultaneously, Pakistan made another thrust into the Chhamb Hills, capturing what are known as the Red Hill and Green Hill pickets, which were held by the three Jammu and Kashmir militia. The 191 Infantry Brigade headquarters was in grave danger. The first day of Operation Grand Slam was a resounding success. Pakistan had gambled that India's conventional response in Chhamb would be slow. It was. The town fell on the first day. According to Pakistani accounts of the fighting, the first stage for the offensive operations had been set by the capture of Chhamb and the advance of the Pakistani army to the Munawar Tavi River. In the second phase now, Major General Akhtar Hussain Malik, the overall commander, was replaced by Major General Yahya Khan, who would of course go on to become Pakistan's military ruler. This, in some Pakistani accounts from the time, is claimed to have been a pre-planned move. In other accounts, It's thought to have been a political decision to ensure that Major General Akhtar was not given credit for the victory and that someone more loyal to the chief ended up winning the kudos. Whatever the truth, the sudden mid-course change of horses was to have a catastrophic impact on Pakistan's military fortune. Through September 4 and September 5, Indian troops remained in retreat. The battle raged, but Indian troops had to pull back along both the Jodia and Kalit axes. A number of determined rearguard defensive actions were found, and meanwhile, frantic efforts were being made by the United Nations to arrange a ceasefire. Pakistan was in no mood to listen though and ignored the United Nations appeals. The Security Council also called for an immediate ceasefire on September 4, but Pakistan, to show her disdain at what she thought was a winning time, staged an air raid on Amritsar the very next day. Chhamb had also turned into a disaster for India. The Indian rearguard actions were at best able to stall the progress a little bit. Indian troops also staged a number of small counter-offensives, but none of these were able to gather any significant momentum. Among the lesser known stories of that desperate Indian resistance is the key role played by covert units which fought deep behind Pakistani lines to try and delay the Pakistani Grand Slam offensive. The most famous of these is the so-called Megduth Force, led by Lieutenant General Harbaksh Singh. The force itself on ground was led by Major Meg Singh, who had experience of clandestine operations in Burma in the Second World War. He offered his services to the generals, and then his force was launched across the Pakistani lines on the 1st of September 1965 into what was called the guts of the enemy. During the night of the 1st and then on the 2nd, Major Meg Singh's soldiers blew up culverts and bridges, attacked Pakistani logistics positions and ambushed troops as they flooded forward. Credit goes to Major Meg Singh for establishing of a link-up with the 68th Infantry Brigade south of the Haji Pir Pass, which you'll recall in the last episode we discussed India taking over on the 10th of September 1965. The Megduth Force showed that irregular forces could play a critical role. Following its actions in the Haji Pir area, the Megduth Force was deployed in Chhamb, where of course Grand Slam had begun. The force carried out harassing raids, spreading chaos and confusion behind the enemy lines. On the 18th of September, the Megduth Force captured an enemy stronghold at Thil in the Kalidhar sector, about 4 kilometers behind the front lines, after killing 50 Pakistani troops and wounding 70. Just 2 men of the Megduth Force were injured in this dashing action. Then, Megduth Force raided an enemy administrative position, again 12 kilometers behind enemy lines. Lieutenant Colonel Meg Singh was unfortunately also wounded in this accident, but the operations of his force would go on until an India-Pakistan ceasefire came into place finally on the 23rd of September. As we've seen, Operation Grand Slam was to come perilously close to success. Enough defensive works hadn't been constructed in the Chhamb-Jodi area due to the lack of proper military appreciation, planning and preparation. There wasn't enough armour to retaliate against the Pakistani offensive, and the intelligence as it became available wasn't acted on. The forces in the field were short of ammunition, and even basic things like mines didn't sometimes reach formations on the ground. The Pakistanis, when they planned Operation Grand Slam, had actually expected India to strongly contest their crossing of the Manawar Tawi. But Indian forces just weren't dug in enough, not having expected Pakistan to begin a conventional war. To make things worse, the Indian Air Force strikes that were badly needed to protect Indian troops from advancing Pakistani armour came in late. By mistake, the Indian official war history records some of the Indian Air Force vampires and mystiers actually ended up knocking out Indian tanks in friendly fire and even attacked our own ammunition depots. That exposed weaknesses in the communications chain and the lack of an adequate wireless communication system for close air support. In the event, Pakistan failed some of its critical objectives, like the capture of the bridge at Akhnur. Historians have debated since whether that was because of Indian success or Pakistani incompetence. The replacing, as we've discussed, of Division Commander Major General Akhtar Malik with Major General Yahya Khan had created a lot of chaos within the Pakistani army itself. And the sudden change meant that operations didn't proceed as smoothly as possible. General Musa was later to offer a number of justifications for his actions and has also blamed in his memoirs Major General Yahya Khan for advancing too slowly after the fall of Jordia. There is no doubt though that just as in the case of Operation Gibraltar, Pakistan had conceived a brilliant plan, executed it well, but then frittered away its gains. India's back at this stage of the campaign was truly to the wall. To the north, it was fighting waves of infiltrators entering Kashmir, who, as I've mentioned, had come up to the very gates of Srinagar. To the south of the Pir Panjal mountains, it was now fighting a conventional Pakistani offensive aimed at Chhamb. There needed to be some quick thinking in Delhi to decide what it could do to deter and punish this two-pronged attack on Jammu and Kashmir. In the third part of this series, we'll look at Pakistan's response and how that led eventually to the famous battle which Pakistanis are now taught was a heroic defense against Indian aggression. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint.